In this video, we talk about how to plan and structure your Amazon business properly, and this will help you to save hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes in the future, protect your assets, and also will let you scale much faster and easier your business long term. Our guest is Seth Kniep from Just One Dime. You will find the link to Just One Dime in the description of this video. Really great training for Amazon sellers. And this conversation is hosted by Lisette Liss. She hosts Orange Klik videos and also works with different Amazon brands as well. And enjoy this conversation. Subscribe to YouTube channel of Orange Klik, because here we talk with different Amazon experts about Amazon.
Hello, Seth. It's nice to have you here today. Could you first introduce yourself and tell us what you do in the Amazon space?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here. My name is Seth Kniep, Keeping It Real. I say that because we're all about keeping things down to earth and showing people the glories and the pains of selling on Amazon FBA. So today I and my team are located in Austin, Texas. We manage over 100 million in annual Amazon revenue through our business partners, through our investors, and then through our own Amazon stores. And we are currently on .com. Some of our business partners are on other platforms. We really do two things. We teach people how to build a legitimate, scalable Amazon business. And on the other side, people invest in us to build businesses for them. And the reason we call it Just One Dime, Lisette, is because when I started, I just had a single dime. That's it. I just went out with a single dime and decided I could take this and build something off of something very small. And my dream was that someday other people could have the same hope that has been given to me. You can start with something very small and you can build it into anything if you have faith and you move to action quickly.
Awesome. That's such a great intro. Like I mentioned you before, I remember watching your videos like 3-4 years ago. And this shows really well that you have to take action, not just learn, but you actually have to act on the knowledge you get. So what's the topic you will share with us today?
So today I'm going to focus on one topic. I think it's a topic that is largely avoided and it needs to be addressed. And that is, how do you know what's the best business structure to build for your Amazon FBA business? In other words, what business structure do you want to choose so that your Amazon business can grow and have the support it needs? It's very easy to pick the wrong kind of business structure, or maybe one that works for a while, but then it's going to limit your growth and increase your liability if it's not a smart business structure. And I'm talking about when you get to a point where you're making enough to invest in other opportunities like stocks, could be Bitcoin, could be real estate. Or if you're just talking about lowering your liability so that if you were to get in a difficult situation, your personal assets are protected. So this is going to be a very technical training today, but I'll be as super ultra clear as possible.
Okay, I think the sellers will be excited. So I know you have prepared the presentation for us as well, so let's dive into it.
Okay, excellent. So again, as Lisette mentioned, the topic is how to pick the best business structure for your Amazon business. Now, the first question I want to ask is, how do I know which business structure is best for me? And this is really going to depend on three things that you want to consider. This applies to you if you're just starting in Amazon or if you've been doing it for a while. The first thing is liability. What are the risks that you will be facing? The second is taxes. How much will the government be taking? A lot of people may not realize this until you start making a lot of money, but your biggest expense is going to be your taxes. If you're in the United States and you're paying income tax, once you get to a high tax bracket, for every $100,000 you make, 37,000 of those you're going to pay back to the national government. And that does not even include the local tax, like a state who may collect income tax as well, or self-employment tax. Number three is paperwork. How much of your time and sanity is going to be taken up in order to comply with legal requirements? So those are the first three things to consider when you're picking your business structure. So first I'm going to cover liability. So the question everyone asks, well, what is liability? How do you define that? And it's very simple. To be liable for something means to be legally responsible. In other words, most newbie entrepreneurs don't even think about liability until they have a major liability, which is understandable. For example, let's say you unintentionally use a product image that belongs to someone else. Even if you downloaded it from a free stock photo website, if the original owner of that photograph sues you and he wins, you could be held liable and have to pay compensation. And that's not just, usually the cost in being sued is not just the compensation you have to pay if you lose, but all the legal fees that you have to pay as well. And if your business, let's say it has $100,000 in cash at that time, and the court orders you to pay $150,000, your business just crumbled over a single image. Now, again, everyone thinks, well, this isn't going to happen to me because I'm just a small business. I'm a nobody. I'm small potatoes and I just started out. Well, if you're thinking big, if your plan is to make a lot of money, if your goal is like, no, I want to grow this huge, then it is really wise to think about this now because it will save you so many dollars and hours in the future if it's set up correctly. If you're a sole proprietorship or you're a general partnership, anything you own is put at risk. So the next question is, okay, well, what business structures carry the most risk? If your business does not have what is called liability protection, the attorney, the lawyer, can not only come after everything that your business owns, but everything that you and your family own, your car, your house, your personal savings, the money in your checking account, your stocks, all of that is now at risk. And if you become a sole proprietorship or you become a general partnership, what happens is your personal assets have zero protection from situations like these. Now, on the other hand, let's say you are a limited partner in a partnership. That's where you're like a silent investor and you have limited company making decisions in the company. You do have protection, but limited partners are usually passive, meaning they don't have to do any of the work. They just invest, but at the same time, they don't make any decisions for the business itself. On the other hand, if you are an S Corp, if you are a C Corp, or if you are a limited liability company, you do have protection. And your business is liable. If your business is liable in case of a lawsuit, the good thing is no one can come after your personal belongings and assets. And this is why they call limited liability company limited, because there's a limitation on who or what is liable. And in this case, only the business is put at risk. Now comes up the next question. Well, okay, Seth, if I'm going to pick the right business structure, what about taxes? How much does the government actually take? Now I'm going to focus primarily for the United States because that is the majority of people we're working with at this time, though we do have a lot of people we're working with in Europe. But even if you're in another country and you're selling in the US, some of this will still apply to you as well. So how much does the government take? Every business pays taxes at some level. I know people like to talk about, find a loophole, get the right tax attorney. There are no legal loopholes to avoid paying taxes. And those who try to avoid this or try to do this end up paying far more in fees and fines and fees and time, and they're lost pondering their actions from behind bars, and it's not worth it. So keep in mind though, even though there are no technically legal tax loopholes, you do have some control over how much taxes you have to pay based on the business structure you use. This is why planning is so important. Just as you were spending many hours trying to find that perfect product, like, man, I just got to find a product that's profitable and it's going to scale. It is worth taking the same focus or effort, not as much time, but the same energy or the same focus into picking the right business structure because it will benefit you later on and reduce your risk like crazy. Every time an employee gets paid, 15.3% of the paycheck amount must go to Social Security and Medicare tax payable to the United States government. Half of these taxes are taken out of the employee's check, and the other half is paid by the employer. The day will come where you may start hiring employees, as we have many. Today we have 37 staff around the world, some right here in Austin, others located in other places. So you're going to get to a point where you're going to be paying part of their what is called self-employment or Social Security or FICA, it's all the same thing, tax. Social Security tax is 12.4%. So 6.2% is paid by each party. And then Medicare tax is 2.9%. So in this case, 1.45% is paid by each party. Now, you're probably asking, well, Seth, why do I need to know this? You're going to know in a moment because the business structure you choose will impact how much of this you legally have to pay or don't. Social Security tax is charged up to currently $137,700 wages cap. In other words, if you make up to this much in a year, you will pay Social Security tax. When you make $1 over that, and I'm speaking only for 2020 right now because it changes every year, when you make $1 over the $137,700, you no longer have to pay Social Security tax on any income above that. The cap means, for example, if you are an employee and you make $150,000 in 2020, you will only be taxed 6.2% on $137,700 of your wages. This levied tax funds the U.S. Social Security program, which theoretically is going to pay for retirement, disability, survivorship benefits received by millions of Americans every year. Now, there is no cap on Medicare tax. There is a cap on Social Security tax. There is no cap on Medicare tax. Medicare pays for hospitals, Medicare costs incurred by current Medicare beneficiaries, and this tax funds the U.S. government's Medicare program. Social Security tax plus Medicare tax together is FICA. It stands for Federal Insurance Contributions Act. To an employee, this is called FICA or Social Security or Medicare tax. To an employer, this is called payroll tax. And to a business, it is called self-employment tax. So all those terms are referring to the same thing. If you run your own business, you must pay the full tax rate on your personal income, which is 15.3%. In other words, self-employment tax. Again, it's so important you understand this because the day will come, or already has, where you start to make a lot of money and you go, oh my goodness, almost half of my money I made in 2019 has been taken back by the government. Is there a way to legally keep more of that money? I'll never forget interviewing Kevin O'Leary at his condo in Florida. And he said, Seth, the most important question is not how much you make, but how much you keep. If you would ask me that 5 years ago, way back when I was really new on Amazon, I would not have understood it. Now I get it. It is so important you know how to protect your assets so that you can grow your worth over time and use that to invest and ultimately create freedom and margin for you and those you love. Beyond $137,700 income, you are taxed on Medicare tax only, not Social Security tax, okay? You also pay income tax on, check this out, half of your self-employment tax as if that was taxable income. Now you're talking about tax inception. Let me repeat that again. You also pay income tax on half of your self-employment tax. In other words, if you take, let's just say you paid $5,000 in self-employment tax, okay? Half of that, $2,500, you pay as if that was income as well. I know it's strange. Don't ask me why. I'm just giving you the facts. Okay, so now I'm going to break it down based on each company. Now that we've gone over self-employment tax, the rest of what I share is going to make so much more sense. Let me start with a sole proprietorship. If you run a sole proprietorship, you must pay taxes on the following: 15.3%, which is self-employment tax, also known as FICA tax. You must pay income tax, and how much you pay is going to depend on the tax bracket that you are in. And then you and the sole proprietorship are considered the same identity. So there's really no company profit tax to pay. It's all personal income. You and your business are one and the same. You are both the same identity. For example, let's just say your sole proprietorship net income is $100,000 for 2020. You pay 24% of the $100,000 based on the current tax bracket. If you're married, this is how it would apply. So that means you owe $24,000 back to the federal government. 15.3% you will owe in self-employment tax, which is $15,300, totaling to, you ready for it? $39,300 in taxes. Let me repeat. You make $100,000, $39,300 of that is going back to the government. Well, I'm going to show you today ways where you can reduce that and your liability 100% legally. Okay, now let's talk about an S corporation. That was sole proprietorship. Let's move over to S corporation. Now, some people get confused by S corp versus C corp. Let me explain. If you open any corporation, by default, you are a C corporation. If you want to become an S corporation, what it is a tax designation. It simply means you want to be taxed differently than a C corporation. That's all it means. So if you run an S corporation, each shareholder must pay taxes on the following: 15.3 self-employment tax, as I mentioned, FICA tax on your personal income, only on the salary that the corporation is paying each shareholder. Shareholders do not pay self-employment taxes on profit distributions to each shareholder. Let me give you an example. Let's just say you made $100,000 from your company, and if you're taxed as an S corp, and by the way, you can be a limited liability company taxed as an S corp. You can be a C corporation taxed as an S corp. Okay? What happens is if you made $100,000 in profit, you have to pay yourself a salary. The IRS requires it, and it has to be a reasonable salary. Let's just say you're unreasonable as in for the work you're doing and where you live, it's what a person of the same, doing the same work, living in the same area would receive, and it's enough to live on. You can't like lower it to $20,000. That would be cheating, and I'll explain why. Let's say of the $100,000, $50,000 of it is your salary. Well, that means the other $50,000 that you've made is a distribution. In other words, it's paid to you, it's still paid to you, but it's not considered your salary. On the distribution, you don't pay the 15.3% self-employment tax, also known as FICA tax. But on the $50,000 of salary, you do pay the self-employment tax. On both, you're going to pay income tax. That's a given. It's going to be around 22%. But you don't pay self-employment tax on the distribution. Now you can see why a lot of people think, man, if I'm an S corp, I don't want to take any salary, or I'll just take $1 a year, and the rest, that will be a distribution. That way I can avoid having to pay self-employment tax. Well, if you do that, you'll probably end up behind bars. Don't try it. You need to pay yourself a reasonable salary. This is the reason a lot of companies file or apply for an S corporation, because it lowers their tax liability. This right here already can save you literally tens of thousands of dollars if and when you are making a lot of money. So let's use the example up here. Well, we talked about that. You make $100,000, you pay yourself a salary of $50,000, and if you're married, you're going to pay about 12% of that in income tax, which is $6,000, plus 15.3% of that in self-employment tax, which is $7,650. But the remaining $50,000 is considered a distribution, so you only pay income tax on that, not the 15.3 of self-employment tax on the remaining $50,000. And this is how you can save money on your self-employment tax if your salary from an S corp is lower than the profits of a partnership or a sole proprietorship. However, as I said, it has to be a reasonable salary. Unless your company's not profitable, okay, they get it. You're not going to pay yourself a salary, or you're really in that startup stage, they'll show you grace. But once you're going, it has to be a reasonable salary. Now keep in mind, income tax is based on your tax bracket, okay? So for example, if you make $100,000, you might pay what? I think the example I used was 12%. If you make $500,000, you're gonna pay closer to the 30%. See what I mean? So based on how much you make is going to impact the more you make, the greater percentage of your income you have to pay back to the government. After salary is paid, the remaining company profits are still passed through to you as an S corporation as distribution, and this is taxed as personal income. Now let's talk about a C corporation. If you run a C corporation, each shareholder must pay taxes on the following. C corporations are the only company structure, by the way, of the 5 that we're looking at that pay taxes as a company. An S corp technically does not pay taxes as a company. An LLC does not pay taxes as a company. A sole proprietorship does not technically pay taxes as a company because all that money is passed through. In other words, if this was your company right here, you make money, your company makes money, it's passed through to you and considered personal income. The C corporation pays taxes on the profits it makes as a company on one side. And by the way, those profits are then paid to shareholders in one of 2 ways. Either as dividends, kind of like distributions with an S corp, or as compensation, which would be salaries or bonuses, like a regular wage. The shareholders pay taxes on the income they receive. So if you are a shareholder in a C corp, the money you receive, you must pay tax on. And there's 2 ways you can receive that money, as dividends or as compensation. This creates a double tax. Because not only is the C corporation paying taxes on its profit, but once that profit is distributed to shareholders, the shareholders are also paying tax on those profits. Company profits are taxed at a corporate tax rate. And company dividends and compensation are taxed at a personal income tax rate. Now, as a general rule, the personal income tax rate is going to be much higher than the corporate tax rate. If the C corporation chooses to pay its shareholders dividends instead of salaries, then the shareholders do not pay self-employment tax on those dividends. And this, of course, benefits the shareholders. In other words, man, I got dividends. I don't have to pay the 15.3% self-employment tax, also known as FICA tax. However, on the other hand, if the C corporation chooses to pay its shareholders compensation, in other words, salaries and bonuses, instead of dividends, then the shareholders do have to pay the 15.3% self-employment tax. However, here's the interesting twist. The corporation may use those compensation payments to their shareholders as tax deductions against their company profits. This benefits the corporation. So now you got two options really. It's like this. Imagine I'm the C corporation. Okay, so we're gonna pay you shareholders dividends. Well, that's nice because those shareholders do not have to pay self-employment tax. That saves them 15.3% of their income having to pay back to the government. They do pay income tax, but not self-employment. Or over here on this hand, I could say, no, we're gonna pay you compensation. We're gonna pay you salaries and bonuses. Wait a minute, Seth, why are you doing that? Now I, as a shareholder, have to not only pay income tax, like I would have to if I received dividends, but also self-employment tax of 15.3%. However, the benefit in that situation is you can take the payments, the compensation you paid your shareholders, and use it as a business expense to lower your tax liability for the company's profit. And that's the advantage. So either way, you're going to benefit one side. Whether shareholders receive dividends or compensation payments, they all have to pay income tax. Keep in mind, income tax, self-employment tax are two different kinds of tax. When you become or are an entrepreneur, you begin to learn, oh my goodness, I got to pay self-employment tax. And it's so important you understand the ramifications. Again, this concept, these teachings here can literally save you hundreds of thousands if you set up your company right and you understand the pros and cons and limitations to each. Unlike an S corporation, when shareholders in a C corporation receive dividends or compensation payments, they cannot deduct losses of the corporation on their tax returns. Company losses, and I'm talking about the shareholders, they can't take all those costs and deduct it on their returns. Company losses can only be deducted against company profit for a C corporation. Now, a C corporation is not required to pay a salary to its shareholders. And you can see why it might be tempted to just pay them a dividend to make them happy so they don't have to pay self-employment tax. But there is a warning here, and many people have ended up in jail for not honoring this, and I'm going to explain it to you. What if a C corporation pays dividends instead of compensation to its shareholders who so happen to also be officers? What is an officer? It's someone running the day-to-day operations of the company, like a CFO, a CEO, a COO, a CTO, a CMO, a C whatever O. Those are all officers. So they're actually running the company, but we're paying them dividends so they can avoid having to pay self-employment tax? Theoretically, this could save the shareholders a lot of money because there is no self-employment tax on dividends. And yet this is illegal and the company could get in big trouble with the IRS. So don't do that if that's your situation. The IRS says, quote, when corporate officers perform a service for the corporation and receive or are entitled to payments, those payments are considered wages. The fact that an officer is also a shareholder, which can be true, you can be both an officer and a shareholder, does not change this requirement. Such payments to the corporate officer are treated as wages. So you can call it whatever you want. When the IRS looks at it, they're gonna go, you've been working for the company, you're doing service for the company, that's a wage. I don't care if you call it a dividend, where's your self-employment tax? And that's where you could get in trouble. In other words, as a C corporation, when you pay people running the company, whether you call it dividends or compensation, the IRS is going to see that as compensation, and those officers running the company are required to pay self-employment tax on their income. C corporations are not required to pay salaries unless the salaries being the people they're paying are officers. But S corps are. However, if no one is hired, Keep in mind, if the C corporation doesn't hire anyone, the IRS can levy fines and consider a dividend distribution as a salary and require self-employment taxes, since someone has to be running the business. In other words, the corporation might say, hey, we don't have any officers, we're all shareholders. And the IRS goes, wow, how are you guys running the company? Who's taking care of your emails, your marketing, your content, upgrading your product, iteration, software? Who's doing it? Oh no, we're taking care of it, but they're not officers, they're shareholders. Well, still, you're gonna get in trouble, so you have to be careful about that. Okay, number 3 is paperwork. We talked about liability, we talked about taxes, now let's talk about paperwork. First, let's discuss paperwork for a sole proprietorship or partnership. There's usually no setting up in paperwork for a sole proprietorship. When you first open your Amazon account, if you said you're a sole proprietor or individual, I think if I remember, it's like individual/sole proprietor, and you typed in your social security number, not an EIN, employer identification number, then you were definitely running as a sole proprietorship, which there's a big risk there. And I'm gonna go into that in a minute. Setting up a general partnership is the same. And the general partnership is like a sole proprietorship, except all it means is there's more than one person involved. You're still gonna pay self-employment tax. All the money that your company makes is passed through. You're still gonna pay income tax. Your liability is just as high. So it doesn't matter if it's a general partnership or sole proprietorship, your liability is high and you're gonna pay full tax. So setting up a general partnership is the same, except I highly recommend you write up an operating agreement with terms to set up profit share expectations for you and your partners and to protect you in case of a disagreement, someone decides to leave, or there's a company loss, and the members need to know in advance, how do we bear that loss? If you set up a limited partnership, and I'll explain that, a limited partnership is where you have one who's general, that means they control the company, and a limited partner, they're an investor, but they're called a silent investor. In other words, they don't have control over the company or they have very limited power. They don't work for the company, they're simply investing, which in that case means they're not going to owe any self-employment taxes unless they're receiving consistent, expected, regular wages on a regular basis. If they're just getting company profits that go up and down like any business, they don't have to pay self-employment tax. And it's called limited because their power is limited. It has nothing really to do with liability. Well, I guess, yeah, their liability is limited as well because they're not controlling the company. But that's what a limited partnership is, where you have a general partner who is control or most control, and then a limited partner. And you can have multiple general partners and multiple limited partners, okay? If you set up a limited partnership, you will need to register with the state, pay a fee to the state, similar in cost to an LLC or a corporation, and write up an operating agreement. It is required. Now let's talk about paperwork for a corporation. Keep in mind that an S corporation is an S corp for tax reasons only. Technically, you don't really ever start as an S corp. You start as an LLC, and then you can elect to be taxed as an S corp. The letter S comes from a part in the legal law in the IRS for a part of the contract that begins with the letter S. I know it's nerdy, but I thought you would want to know that. If you start as a corporation, which is always going to be a C corporation unless you're doing something special, then you also have to file to be an S corp because that means you want to be taxed a specific way. In other words, pass-through income. You pay self-employment on your income tax. You do not pay self-employment on the distributions or dividends that are paid out. You could be an LLC and still also be an S corp for tax reasons only. Corporations require the most paperwork and have the most bureaucratic complexity. So on one side, corporations can do a lot. They can go public, they can do an IPO, they are the best at raising funds, way more than LLC or an S corp or a sole proprietorship or a partnership, general or limited. But on the other hand, you do have a lot of paperwork. So if you're gonna go C corp, this means you're going big and there is a lot of paperwork involved. Now I'm gonna show you how to start a corporation. First of all, you choose a legal name and you file with the Secretary of State. In most states, that's what it's called in the US. You could be living in Russia, you could be living in Estonia, you could be living in the United Kingdom and still start a company in the US. But if you do in that case, go with a limited liability company. A limited liability company has the most flexibility internationally of all these types. C corporations do not have as much flexibility for that. But if you're living in the US and you want to go public and your company's growing fast, a C corporation is your best option. Second, you're going to draft and file your articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State. Typically, you just fill out a few blank forms. It's not that difficult. Third, you're going to issue stock certificates to the initial shareholders and choose at least 2 officers, a president and a secretary minimum. You have to do this to be a C Corp. Fourth, you're going to appoint a board of directors and officers. The board of directors is charged with overseeing the overall operations of the business enterprise. You know, those people that come in the minute with the suits and they sit down at the long table and they, how are the stocks doing today? That's your board of directors. Finally, I don't remember what number we're on now. You're going to apply for any required permits, in other words, licenses, and other certificates specific to your industry. Now, most Amazon sellers don't have to worry about this part right here, but it depends on your product. I get so many messages on Instagram, just when I'm Instagram, where there are people saying, wait, where's the certification for a child product, a high-risk product, a supplements? It is your responsibility to know in advance before you start your company what certificates you need. Now, obviously, we'll help as much as we can. But at the end of the day, know that before you go in. That's really important. For example, if you were to, right here in Austin, Texas, down the street where we're opening a coffee shop, if we cook food, we have to have certain licenses approved by the city to cook food because it involves heat and fire, electricity, and it's a fire hazard. If we sell alcohol at that coffee shop, we have to have an alcohol license. So you need to know that for your business before you go in. Then you're going to file Form SS4 on the IRS website to obtain what is called an employer identification number. Typically, now when things are crazy with COVID and all that, it takes forever. It could take weeks. Typically, this takes a few hours. You literally go in, you fill out a form, and they send it to you within hours. You have your EIN. Then you're going to apply for any other ID numbers required by state and local government agencies. Requirements vary from one jurisdiction to another, but generally your business most likely will be required to pay unemployment, disability, and other payroll taxes. And by the way, for unemployment, disability, and other payroll taxes, it depends on the state. Unemployment usually is across the board with the states in the US, even if you're a limited liability company. If you're employing people, you have to have an EIN, okay? So if you have an EIN, you're a company. You need to be ready to pay unemployment. Disability, it depends. For example, in the state of Texas, you have to have more or 10 or more employees to be required to pay, no, I think it's 50. I forget now. But anyways, it depends on the state. You have to have a certain number of employees before you have to do some of these things. Payroll taxes, you always have to pay those. Now let's talk about how to start an LLC as compared to a sole proprietorship, a general partnership, or a C corporation. First, you're going to choose a legal name and file with the Secretary of State. Again, it depends on the state. Second, you're going to file your articles of organization. And this is, again, it's a simple document. You can, you just fill it out, and the purpose of it is to establish your existence as an LLC in your state. And number 3, you're going to create an operating agreement. There are so many operating agreements online, it's not even funny. You can hire someone from LegalZoom, you can hire a lawyer, you can do it yourself. Just make sure all it does is it's letting you know, here's in the world, here's how this company will run. And if you have a partner, that's really important. If you have employees, that's really important. So what do we do in this situation? What about voting power? Who are the owners? Who are the shareholders? All of that stuff. File Form SS4 on the IRS website, as I mentioned earlier, for your employer identification number. Now, if you are a single member LLC, you do not have to get an EIN. When you open your Amazon seller account, you can just put in your social security number. That's fine. It's a single member LLC / social security number. You can do that. A lot of people do not prefer putting their social security number online on this massive platform. I completely understand. So I would recommend you get an EIN because at some point you're going to need it anyways if you're going to open a business bank account. Okay, so that is a runover of everything I just shared with you, a runover of the pros and cons for each structure. Now, what I'm going to share as well, if you can just actually email me, seth@justonedime.com, I will send you a breakdown of all the most important information based on this topic. But there's one last thing I want to address. When you're thinking about building your business, there is nothing wrong with starting as a sole proprietorship. And later, when you have more funds, I get it, guys. I started with a single dime. As funds come in, then you upgrade to an LLC. Then later on, you're like, you know what? We should file as an S Corp because now that we have employees, that'll actually help us to save a lot on having to pay so much in tax, which is exactly what we did. Even if you don't have employees, there's big advantages because you're still gonna have to pay self-employment tax if you have an LLC. So it doesn't mean you're no longer an LLC. You're an LLC that is taxed as an S Corp. And then if you want to take the next step and you're like, you know what? We're ready to be a corporation. We understand the double tax rate, but the advantages are there. And we're going to have more than 100 shareholders. We may go public someday. We want to go through seeds of funding, seed A, seed B, or seed funding, A funding, B funding, and so forth. We want to raise capital to grow huge. That's the time when you become a C Corp. None of these structures are bad. What's important is that you understand the risk. Let me give you a simple example. If you are selling supplements, if you are selling products that a child would use, someone under the age of 5, Amazon has this really interesting parameter. As soon as your product is for someone who's under the age of 5, the risk goes up drastically. Your chances of someone getting hurt or getting a stomach ache or dying or choking has just increased like 1,000 times. Not only should you have general liability insurance for your company, at least $1 million in coverage, if not 5 to 10, but you also should strongly consider becoming an LLC. That way, if you do get sued, all they can take is stuff in the company. They can't take your personal assets. It'll reduce your stress drastically. One more thing you need to know. I'm not against all lawyers when I say this. Lawyers have their job, and many of them do a great job. But there's some lawyers out there who are complete sleazeballs. And all they do is they look for companies that sell baby products or supplements, and they try to find a client or a customer who ended up in the hospital or got in a car wreck as a result. This happens a lot with automobile companies. And they call them and say, look, we can make a lot of money. I'll help you sue. And they go after high-risk product companies. Like, they literally do this as a business. And it's illegal. I know it's sad, but it's true. It's illegal. Their goal obviously is just money in this situation for these particular lawyers, not all lawyers. And I want you to understand that if you are a sole proprietorship, you're a bigger target, especially if you're selling a high-risk product. If you're an LLC, well, that's going to be a little harder for that lawyer to come after you. I mean, they can still do it, but they're going to be more limited on what they can take. So just keep that in mind. There are certain things you can do to make yourself less of a target. One last thought. When it comes to paying taxes, if you are looking for tax advice, I'm not a CPA. I'm not a lawyer. You need to go consult with a professional for your final decision. I'm simply teaching you what I've learned having worked with many lawyers, and my CPA team just so happens to be the same team that does Robert Kiyosaki's taxes, the author of Rich Dad Poor Dad. So this is information that is absolutely precious to us, and I think it's fascinating. All right, well, back to you, Lisette.
Awesome. Thank you so much for such a detailed presentation. And you were like so excited throughout all of it. So thanks a lot for that. I see you're really passionate about the topic. So what was the point during your seller journey when you started to understand that you have to improve your existing business structure?
Great question. When I started, I was a sole proprietor. I might have had a little bit of an idea what an LLC was, but I didn't understand it. And my goal was to move to cash as quickly as I could. And that's what I would say to everyone watching. You want to move to cash quickly. Don't take a shortcut, but get your company the money. It's like a newborn baby. You have this baby and it's fragile. If you go a day without feeding that child, or even maybe in some cases a few hours, the child could die. So it needs, just like a baby needs food, it needs its mother's milk. Your newborn company needs cash to survive. So don't stress about this if you're just starting off. And that's what I did, Lisette. I just started by becoming a sole proprietor. I was sole proprietorship. I added my social security number. I didn't have to do anything with the state, and I just started making money. And my wife and I started reselling, and then we started doing private label and grew. But as time went on and we started making more money, I realized, man, a lot of my money is going back to the government. And the more I make, the greater percentages of it go back. And this is somehow not proportionate. It's like, why the harder I work do I have to pay more? That doesn't make any sense. And so that's when for me, I learned it first from taxes, then liability. I didn't have a liability issue, but I realized, oh my goodness, I need to be smart with my money. And so that's when I started consulting with lawyers. And then I became an LLC. And then we opened multiple LLCs. And now we have holding companies where you can have one LLC here, and then underneath that, you have 3 different LLCs, and each of these represents a different Amazon brand company or real estate company or coaching company, the 3 primary industries that I'm in right now.
Okay, great. So have you had any personal experiences with liability issues?
No, I have never had any liability issue as far as someone coming after us or let me go back. So the products that we sell on Amazon are very low risk. We do some electronics. Obviously, those are higher risk because of fire hazards, but there are ways to test those and to make sure you have the right certification so that your risk is lowered. But we don't do supplements. We do toys, but we don't do baby products. So we've never been in a situation where someone said, "Oh my goodness, this product, it hurt my child, I'm suing you." What I do find interesting though, Lisette, is Amazon, if you watch their history over time, I don't know if you remember reading about this, but remember the hoverboard incident where they had these hoverboards, one of them went on fire, it burned down this house, 2 teenagers practically had to jump out of the window, the dad was trying to save them, like it was terrible. What's happened over time is Amazon has become more and more strict on these things because they've become a bigger and bigger target, which is something we all need to learn from as Amazon sellers. The more you make, the bigger target you become, and therefore their requirements have gone up. So here's something super practical people can use. When you are selling a product and you don't know, well, what is my liability? Like for all practical reasons, it seems to be very innocuous, very innocent. Create the listing, wait 2 weeks, see if Amazon adds any of those, the special flag you get that everyone loves in Seller Central. See if Amazon puts any claims or flags on that listing, and now quickly you can decide, oh my goodness, so I do need to go get the certification before I can sell this product. That's better than getting it manufactured, paying a supplier, getting it in Amazon FBA, and then you find out, oh, by the way, you can't sell this.
As we are talking about resources, do you have any good resource sellers could look into to understand the US sales tax system better? Because I know a lot of European sellers are struggling with that.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm going to recommend someone who actually is going to be on my podcast tonight. I'm not an affiliate to him. If I was, I'll tell you guys. But his name is Evan Kirkpatrick. Kirkpatrick is one word. Kirk Patrick, just like it sounds. Patrick, and Kirk is Kirk. He's been on my podcast once before. People loved it. We're bringing him back on again tonight. And then if people didn't get that name, they're welcome to email me, seth@justonedime.com, and I'm more than happy to send his information as well as a few other resources as well. A lot of people will go to LegalZoom. I think LegalZoom's fine, but LegalZoom is sort of like, I'll just be honest, 50% of their tasks, like they even have a service where they will apply for an EIN for you. It takes about 90 seconds for a regular human being with no tech experience to apply for an EIN. So LegalZoom's making like really good money off of doing almost nothing. There's other stuff they provide that's great, but a lot of the LegalZoom type companies, half of it I think is great. The other half, they're just making money off stuff you could do if you do a quick Google. But if you want something more in depth, shoot me an email, seth@justonedime.com, and I'm happy to help.
Awesome. So if you would think right now, if you would start a new company and you could register it in whatever country you want, which country would you choose?
Estonia. I'm saying that as a joke because Augustus is awesome. But so it's interesting. Estonia is one of the great countries, Lithuania as well, a really good country for starting an offshore company. As an American citizen, I would still start it right here in the heart of Texas. I've looked into this in a lot of depth, and there's something called Subpart F. It was in response to Microsoft doing some really, I wouldn't call it shady. I mean, it was legal, but they were really working the system, Lisette, where they had these companies in places like Panama and other places to really reduce their tax liability. It was legal, but the IRS realized they're literally avoiding paying hundreds of millions because they found a kink, a loophole, a legal loophole in the system. So as a result, thank you, Microsoft, it is now really not very beneficial as an American citizen, if you go into it deep, in most situations to have an offshore company. And again, I'm speaking from my experience, not as a lawyer, but I've worked with multiple lawyers who've told me the same thing, and I've studied it myself because I love this kind of language, because in many cases, you will pay not just tax to that country, but also to the US. The US still wants their piece. If you don't live in the US, doing an offshore company makes a lot more sense. Dan Rogers, one of our content creators, Amazon sellers, and coaches with Just One Dime, he actually just did a video on this on our YouTube channel where he talks about all these different countries where you can incorporate. But if I was to start over again, Lisette, it would be in the state of Texas.
Awesome. Thank you so much for today's presentation and interview. I enjoyed it a lot. So if anybody has any question, what's the best way to reach out to you?
So there's two ways. You guys can either send me an email, Seth@just1, spelled out O-N-E, dime.com, or feel free to go to our website, justonedime.com, and there's tons of free information there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and we wish good luck in your business.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisette. Everyone have an awesome day. Keep crushing it.
I do hope the information you heard was useful and you can still implement that in your business. And check below in the description for the links to Just One Dime. This is what Seth Kniep does, and he trains different Amazon businesses. And now I would like to invite you to watch other video where we talk about how to expand for Amazon sellers in Europe to US market. So if you're running a European-based business, you will hear some tips in this video how to properly and what business structure to choose to expand to North America.